Good evening, and welcome to the second of this year's Stroum Lectures. I'm Paul Burstein, Professor of Sociology and Political Science, at one time Chair of the Jewish Studies Program, and I'm very honored and pleased to be able to reintroduce Steve Cohen to you tonight. One thing I want to mention, coming from Monday's lecture, by the way, is when he was talking about people who identify as Christians and Jews simultaneously, there were a certain number of gasps around the room. I think it's hard for people to picture that. It doesn't make sense. I just want to mention that this sort of thing actually happens all the time. If you ask people their political ideology and they say conservative, for example, about 25% of the people who say they're conservative, if you ask them on issue after issue what position they prefer, they'll consistently pick the liberal position. If you got a bunch of Christians together in a room, Methodists, Baptists, Lutherans, Catholics, and so on, and you ask them to try to say, well, what does it mean to be a Lutheran as opposed to a Baptist as opposed to a Methodist, most of them wouldn't be able to tell you a thing. And I'm sure that the number of them who would say, yeah, okay, no problem being a Christian and a Jew at the same time. So this kind of discussion has a special meaning for people in this audience, but the phenomenon of people using categories that in a somewhat different way than we might be used to is not unusual. Anyway, now to the actual introduction. Now, there are two centers, significant centers in the entire country where big picture quantitative research on Jews in the United States is being done. There's one at Brandeis, and there's one that's organized by and kind of around our speaker, Steve Cohen. His impact on our understanding of American Jewish life is just immense. Now, partly it's because he publishes so much, and what he publishes is of such high quality. Anything that you read in any of your Jewish publications, and sometimes the other publications as well, New York Times and so on, if you trace it back, if they're not actually quoting him, if you trace things back a couple steps, where did they get this information? It's probably connected to Steve somehow, or at least the good, sensible stuff. But there are at least three other reasons why his impact is so great. First, he's an amazing colleague. He's worked with many of the leading lights in the field of Jewish studies. When he was younger, he was working with people who are older, and he still is to a lesser extent. He works with people his own age. He works with people who are younger. He's an amazing mentor. He draws people into doing research on Jews in the United States. He works with them. He encourages them. He mentors them. And the number of publications that are either co-authored with him or acknowledge him and thank him is just tremendous. He influences many, many other people who study Jews in the United States. Second kind of influence he has is he influences students in universities and colleges all over the United States taking courses on Jews in the United States. In fact, it's hard to take a course on Jews in the United States without there being included at least something by him in the syllabus. I actually put together a syllabus collection a few years ago for sociologists of courses that were taught on Jews in the United States, and it turned out that the book most often used in American university courses on Jews in the United States is a book that Steve wrote with Arnie Eisen called The Jew Within: Self, Family, and Community in the United States. So the young people in colleges and universities are learning about American Jewish life from Steve Cohen and his colleagues. And the third reason that makes what he does so important is that he gives talks like this to people like us. Now, of course, this talk is way better than the others because these are the Stroum Lectures. But nevertheless, he's tirelessly goes around the country and takes the knowledge that he has acquired and spreads it around and gets people talking, and that's a totally invaluable service. His topic tonight is devotion, distancing, and disloyalty, the diversity and complexity of American Jews' relationship with Israel. Steve Cohen.
Thank you. It's remarkable. Thank you. I appreciate it. I was having a great time sitting here. I just wanted you to continue. Thank you, Paul. That's really, and if Noam had said it, he said, well, we're friends. Paul and I actually were colleagues, but we hardly know each other. This is our first dinner we've had together. So even more so, thank you for those extraordinarily kind words, and I hope to live up to them. It's one of the only downside to getting such a flowery and kind and gracious introduction is that you raise people's expectations. So if you can just lower them, that would be terrific. So here's what I want to talk about. I've actually been composing this talk for quite a while, since dinner, and I'm going to try to do a number of things, and when I run out of time or run out of ideas, we'll turn it over to you. The topic that I want to look at is essentially American Jews' relationship to Israel, how it's been changing, how it's been challenged, and how people are conceptualizing it differently than they have in the past. And in the course of doing that, in the course of looking at how American Jews relate to Israel, I also want to speak about Israel and its national struggle with the Palestinians and the place of American Jews in that struggle. So that's where I'm going. I'll try to do this in fairly short order to leave plenty of time for back and forth. One of the prevailing or most present notions about American Jewry and Israel today is that younger people are more distant from Israel than older people. That is actually there's something to be said for that. But that observation or that suspicion has fueled a whole bunch of thinking about is it true, what does it mean, in exactly what way. It is the case that however you measure attachment to Israel, younger Jews as a group look less attached to Israel. And I'm saying you can ask them, do you talk about Israel? Do you think about Israel? Do you care about Israel? Is Israel important for your Jewish identity? Would the destruction of Israel be regarded by you as a great personal tragedy? Do you read about Israel? Do you pay special attention to stories in newspapers about Israel? On all of those questions, we see a fairly consistent pattern, and that is that the oldest people outscore the not-so-old people, who outscore the middle-aged people, who outscore the younger people, who outscore the younger adults. There's a continual decline in every one of these measures, no matter which measure you look at. Are you pro-Israel? You can ask people, are you a Zionist? On all those questions, you see the same pattern, one question after the other. There could be a bump here, a bump there, but you're really seeing the same pattern. The question is, why and what does it portend for the future? One set of scholars, the people actually at Brandeis, believe that what we're seeing is the repetition of a family life cycle effect. That is, that as people get older, they grow into a more Israel-attached orientation with time. I want to be very clear. There's something to be said for this, because as people get older, they're more at risk for traveling to Israel, which elevates your attachment. They are likely to marry and have children. Having children is associated with upward moves in all measures of Jewish involvement. So there is a lot to be said for the maturation hypothesis. And basically my friends and colleagues at Brandeis University are saying that this pattern that Ari Kelman and I noticed in our data from 2007, that really is simply a recapitulation of this old pattern of maturation, and people just getting on at the bottom of the escalator, they're moving up, and there has been no significant change from year to year. In contrast, Ari's and the view that Ari Kelman and I have. Ari is a professor of Jewish education now at Stanford University. Our view is that while there's much to be said for the maturation hypothesis, if you look at the data very carefully, as we believe we have, we see that a large reason for the decline in Israel attachment among younger people, and this only applies to the non-Orthodox, is that much greater numbers of them are intermarried or the children of the intermarried. If you just look at people who have Jews who have two Jewish parents and are either single or married to Jews, the differences from old to young actually disappear, and it may even be the case that younger people who are in that category outscore older people who are in that category, in part because in marriage among younger people is more of an act of Jewish affirmation than it was or is for older people. When my parents got married in 1949, they really had no choice. I mean, they had to marry a Jew. This wasn't an act of, this wasn't a Jewish choice on their part. And when you get to my children's generation, their act of marrying a Jew is more highly predicted by their living among Jews, by their having strong Jewish parental background and having strong Jewish education. So in a sense, the in-married today are more selected for in marriage than were their parents or grandparents. Hence, in-married people today actually may have higher rates of Israel attachment than in-married people of 40, 50 years ago. Among the intermarried, on the other hand, we see that there are significant differences on all measures of Jewish engagement, but the smallest differences are associated with that part of being Jewish which comes closest to religious Christianity. Holidays, joining a house of worship, belief in God. On those measures, intermarried people trail the unmarried, but not by as much as areas of ethnic attachment, groupiness, being attached to other Jews, having Jewish friends, living in a Jewish neighborhood, maybe even watching Jon Stewart, I'm not sure. But on the ethnic measures, the intermarried more significantly trail the unmarried, and among all the ethnic measures where the gaps are greatest for anything having to do with Israel. As much as friendship is different, or Jewish organizations, or giving to a federation, you find these gaps. On the Israel measures, they're especially large. And I think one reason might be, I have no idea, is that there is no analogy in Christianity for attachment to the Jewish homeland. There's an analogy to synagogue, it's called church. There's an analogy to Passover, it's called Easter. An analogy to Hanukkah, it's called Christmas. And it's an analogy to God, it's called God. But there's no analogy to Israel. You know, it's not the Vatican. There's nothing like it, and there is no category that Israel fills that is left empty for Christians. So I think that's part of it. And just to give you the sense of the difference, in one big population study that I did, among the children of the in-married, 33% had been, these teenage children, 33% had been to Israel. Among the children of the intermarried, it was 3%. In Boston, there was a study, just looking at Reform, children of Reform parents. They're both Reform. In-married Reform parents, 15% had sent their teenagers to Israel. Intermarried Reform parents, 1%. We're talking about really substantial differences in Israel attachment. Birthright Israel, free program. You can't go on this program if you've had an educational experience with Israel. You have to. You're basically excluded if you're if you're a young Judea kid, or probably if you're Orthodox, if you've been on any of these programs. So this is a program that's free, and theoretically it should pick up a lot of intermarried kids. It turns out that on a per capita basis, even stripping off the most committed kids who go, and being left with those who are not all that involved with Israel, the per capita rate of travel among in-married versus intermarried, children of intermarried versus intermarried, is roughly 4 to 1. That if your parents are intermarried, you have about 1/4 the chance of stepping forward and saying, "I'd like to go on birthright," as someone who comes from a more conventional, in-married, reform or conservative home. So I'm just trying to make the case of how powerful intermarriage is as an explanation for why older and younger Jews may differ. And therefore, looking forward to the future, as opposed to my good friends and colleagues at Brandeis, I think the maturation effect will not set in for this population. In the past, it would make sense. We have a smaller fraction that's intermarried. That's what we saw. I believe the intermarriage issue will prevent the previous processes of maturation from lifting the average rate of Israel attachment, which means that we're looking toward a future with a smaller number of non-Orthodox Jews who will be Israel attached. Next, Israel distancing and being disturbed by Israel are two entirely different and, let's even say, antagonistic phenomena. Let me try to explain that. When Ari and I issued the distancing hypothesis and got a number of headlines, I would say most readers, most people said, here's what they're saying. They're saying Israel is doing all these terrible, awful things, and American Jews, especially young liberal American Jews, are disgusted and upset with Israel, and they're becoming more distant from Israel. That is not what we meant. These are two separate phenomena. In fact, people who are disturbed by Israel, who find Israel's actions on the territories problematic, or its actions, or the actions of some ultra-Orthodox vis-a-vis women deeply upsetting, or anti-democratic forces within the Knesset, or among other public figures, especially abhorrent. And you can go on. There really are a number of problems with Israeli society. I don't have to tell you. People who have a reaction who's saying, Israel is problematic for me, and it disturbs me, as generally, by the way, as liberals are more disturbed than are conservatives on these issues. But they are not people who are distant from Israel. I should let you know, I'm an Israeli. I sound like I'm from Brooklyn. I'm also from Brooklyn. But I made Aliyah in 1992. My citizenship is Israeli. I go through the Israeli passport line. In fact, I actually have a little card. I don't have to do that. I can just kind of put they know my handprint, and I just walk through without a passport. But seriously, I'm Israeli. My driver's license is Israeli. I vote in Israeli elections. I've been Israeli since 1992. And I assure you, a lot of my friends and I were very, very upset with Israel, or parts of Israel. I would not call us distant from Israel. We're upset because we're very close to Israel. So it is with American Jews, and those who have. I have to tell you that when many of you are familiar with the journalist and thinker, public intellectual Peter Beinart, who wrote a compelling article in the New York Review of Books in 2010, and then just came out with a book called The Crisis of Zionism in the last few months. And Peter makes the case that Israel has moved in an anti-democratic direction. American Jews are liberals. Jewish organizations have not challenged Israel, and that's why Jewish young people are upset with Israel. I mean, they're also and alienated from Jewish life and alienated from Israel. Pieces of this argument are correct, but and I've told him this, and he's backtracked. You'll take a look. The book doesn't connect all these pieces the way the article did in the New York Review of Books. But pieces of the connections between these phenomena are not accurate. And I've told Peter, and he's accepted the idea, that the reason that Jews are distant from Israel is because of this mounting intermarriage. The reason that those Jews who are upset with Israel actually are demographically a very small group. By and large, you don't include the Orthodox. By and large, you also, people who are not upset with Israel, include people who were born in a foreign country or whose parents were born in a foreign country. So basically, Israelis, Russians, Persians, and others of recent international migration to the United States. You start adding up, you get a whole bunch of people. Those people are not upset with Israel. Then there are people who don't even think about Israel, don't even care about Israel. It doesn't even occur to them to have any questions about Israel. I mentioned intermarry, but there are a lot of other people who don't care about Israel. Those people are not upset. So you get rid of it. And then you're left with, then you have people who are fairly conservative with a small c. A lot of them, a selection of them appears at the AIPAC conferences. They're not upset with Israel. So what you're left with is a small group of a liberal Jewish communal and professional elite who are very influential, very critical to the Jewish future, and they're the ones who are upset with Israel. So it's numerically a small group, but culturally and intellectually a very influential group. I just did a study of JTS alumni. These are rabbis and rabbinical students who graduated, who were ordained by JTS from 1980 until now, who are students today. And what did we find there? Did we find distancing? The argument that several people have made is that younger rabbis are more distant from Israel. They don't get it the way the older rabbis did. As a matter of fact, when I ran the survey, I found that on all measures of Israel attachment, the younger rabbis were just as attached, if not more attached, than the older rabbis. They in fact, are slightly more likely to have spent more time studying in Israel. The older rabbis that had 2.6 programs in Israel. It's a lot, right? And the younger rabbis had 2.8. The rates of considering Aliyah are no different. The rates at which people say I'm pro-Israel, no different. The rates at which people say I'm a Zionist is no different. So is there any difference? Are younger rabbis different from older rabbis? The answer is yes. They're different with respect not to their attachment to Israel, but they're different with respect to their views on the conflict. And it comes out in 3 or 4 or 5 really very critical ways in which I hadn't expected. I expected and found that the younger rabbis were a little bit more dovish on issues of territories and settlements, so forth and so on. I expected that. What I didn't expect, and I learned that this is part of the left-right continuum or dialogue in American Jewry and also in Israel, is that the younger rabbis / leftish rabbis / dovish rabbis, and I'm giving these are overlapping terms, were less skeptical about the Palestinians. They were skeptical, but saw them as less antagonistic, and they were more skeptical about the Israeli government. So when I ask, whether the Israeli government wants peace, whether the Israeli government really wants to stop the emergence of a Palestinian state, they were more likely to adopt what would be leftish or dovish views about the Israeli government. Then I asked questions about a variety of Israeli-related political organizations, or Israeli-related organizations, some political, some not. And you had AIPAC, Stand With Us, and a variety of Israel advocacy groups, people who like one, like the other. Then you had New Israel Fund, Encounter, J Street. And people who liked one of those like the rest of those. So there were these two dimensions, a right-of-center Israel dimension in terms of their political identity, and a left-of-center political dimension. And what you found among the older rabbis, when asked, do you like AIPAC or do you like J Street, you can like both, you can like neither, but basically people, you voted for one or the other. I'm one of the few living American Jews who actually belongs to both. But the older rabbis chose AIPAC, basically 2-to-1 over J Street, and the younger rabbi, and as I watched the age spectrum, support for AIPAC declined, support for J Street increased, such that by the time you got to students were somewhat more likely to identify with J Street than to identify with AIPAC. The lines had crossed. So it's not that younger rabbis, and this is conservative, the Reform rabbis are even going to be further to the left on these issues. It's not that they are more distant from Israel. It's that they are more distant from what essentially is the right-of-center government in Israel. Now, how do we explain this, and how do we understand this? And I'll try to present a personal story, or my personal biography, which I think can embody this trajectory. I first became involved with Israel in 1966. I was, for reasons which I cannot explain, I joined Young Judea in Brooklyn. I didn't have any Young Judea friends, either before or after joining. Maybe I wanted Young Judea friends, I joined, it didn't happen. That was not the reason I joined. I don't know why. I cannot remember why I was in Young Judea, but this was before the Six-Day War. I didn't know there was a war coming. I joined, this was 66. I show up at Columbia University, and I seek out the Student Zionist organization, which was about to be offed by dropped, whatever the word is, this is Columbia talk, about to be dropped by Hadassah. I become active in the Student Zionist organization, and I become the leader of Jewish students in general at Columbia University, and especially of Israel. And I start, in order to make money to fund the organization, we start Israeli dancing at Earl Hall. So to this very day, on Monday night, there is Israeli dancing at Columbia University because of my friends and myself. We then have the virtue of the Six-Day War and all the campus upheaval that is coincident with it, and fights around Israel. And for years, I'm active as a pro-Israel Zionist. In 1969, the Jewish agency representing the State of Israel, which had made it illegal for Israelis to speak with Palestinians in an official capacity, sent Lova Eliav, who was Secretary General of the Labor Party, and would be kicked out of the Labor Party by Golda Meir for his dovish positions. They sent him to my campus to speak to us about the conflict, about Israel and Palestine. And I remembered forever the speech that he gave. I can't do this. Okay, and he holds up a cloth, and he says, in the Talmud it says that if two men, that's who would be holding a tallis, if two men bring a tallis to the rabbis, and they each claim that this tallis belongs to me, and the rabbis believe each man, what is the rabbi supposed to do? You're supposed to cut the tallis in half and give one half to one and one half to the other. And that obviously, it was very clear that what he was saying was that, hi, I'm a partitionist. I believe there should be a Jewish state of Israel and there should be a Palestinian state of Palestine. And he said, it's not that I care about the Palestinians. I remember his words. He said, if if they were living in Burma, I would sign a petition for them. But they're living with us in Israel, and we have to figure out a way how to separate us, because I don't want to live among them, and they don't want to live among me. That's 1969. So in 1970, when I have to debate the Students for Democratic Society, who had a one-state solution to Israel, I got up and I said, well, you are so irrelevant. You don't represent the true interests of the people living in the area. I do. I want to have two states. I want to have a Jewish state of Israel, and I want to have an Arab state of Palestine. That was 1970. I haven't changed my mind since then about that issue. That in order for Israel to be secure, we need to get to a Palestinian state somehow. I then spent many years in Israel and Zionist activities. Obviously, I acquire friends who have the same points of view. I roll the clock forward, and I think Israel just has to be part of American Jews' lives. I moved to Israel in 1992. I make Aliyah. I kind of make partial Yerida. Afterwards, I come back, and I want to roll the clock forward to now. Hold that. I want to roll the clock forward to 2007. Noam, Palo Alto. Right. So in 2007. Arnie Eisen is about to become chancellor of the seminary. And as a last act of using Stanford research funds, he decides to bring myself and a whole bunch of really smart, incredibly devoted, talented Jewish young people, which for us, for young, for you, maybe not so, to come to Stanford. He decides to do this, unfortunately, on April 23rd. Which is actually, we're 2012? 5 years to the date to where we are tonight. Exactly 5 years. What am I saying? It was the 5th of Iyar, as right now is the 5th of Iyar. It was Israel Independence Day. So, reflecting who I am, and by the way, we have this incredible love fest. Arnie and I make the mistake of saying to our young friends, you're doing terrific things. You know, when we were your age, we did pretty much the same things, and these people said, "Oh no, you didn't. It was very different." And we said, "Oh, you're right. We're very, very sorry. It's very, very different." And then we went off and said, "It's the same thing, right?" So, said, "Yes, we won't say that." So it's now 3:00 in the afternoon. We have this wonderful. I'm not going to tell you who's there. Was this wonderful encounter, and I, in an act of this word in Hebrew is called shavav, like it's a mischievous person, partly out of mischief, but partly out of real sincerity. I said, folks, listen, I'm Israeli, I'm a Zionist, it's Yom HaTzmaut, the sun is almost down, I feel terrible that we're sitting here, we're not really talking about Israel, as we are tonight, by the way, and I think we should stand up and sing Hatikvah. Could you do me that favor? So Arnie starts moving, and everybody else is sitting, and nothing's happening. And I knew this would be a provocative act. And I said, well, and what's going on? We don't feel comfortable doing that. And there was like kind of a solidarity of the younger generation around us, and we couldn't move them. And then I said, well, what if we sang Shir Hamalot? Shir Hamalot is the beginning of the Birkat HaMazon. But it's also the hymn, the national hymn, the subsidiary national hymn of the National Religious Party and folks in Israel. And Arnie said, we could sing that to the tune of Hatikvah. To make me feel better. So we looked around and said, can you do that? And they said, yeah, we can do that. So these people who are incredibly attached to Israel, who almost all of them speak Hebrew. One of them I happen to know, his wife was at that moment living in Jerusalem for a few weeks. We're not talking about people who are distant from Israel. That they agree to do, and they stand up and they sing Shir Hamalot to the tune of Hatikvah 5 years ago, on the 59th anniversary of the founding of the State of Israel. Hold that. A couple of years after that, I'm on the advisory board of J Street. You'll ask me why later. I'm a right-wing dove, but I'll explain. Thanks to Paul, we're allowed to use any labels we want. I am the oldest man in the room who's called to we have some of the same people and others. We go to Washington, and in order to see if these younger people can bring Israel into their communities and talk about Israel. And we have this whole session, whole day in which we talk about Israel activism, and you can do anything you want. It wasn't political. It wasn't necessarily about J Street. There's a meeting at the White House, which is very impressive and very nice, except it wasn't the White House. It was the building next door to it, but it was good. It was a lot of fun. And at the end of the meeting, we said, well, what are you going to do? And people said, nothing. We enjoyed being here. Thank you for bringing us to Washington, but we can't touch this. This is too critical an issue. It will divide our communities. We have other issues that we need to pursue. And I'm getting really very concerned and upset. A year after that, the same group that met on the 5th of ER in 2007 meet again. It's now 3 years later. And I said, what was that all about? Why couldn't you people stand up? Seriously, could you let's talk about this. And they said, look, I mean, that act is an act of identifying with an oppressive regime. I mean, we love Israel, but that it just seemed very, very inappropriate. It wasn't who we are. And they had other explanations as well. And I said, are you nuts? Like, do you know where I am on this issue? Do you understand my involvement in for a Palestinian state and opposing the settlements and labor Zionists and all that? They said, no. I said, really? That's my fault. So I decided from that moment on, that I would use every opportunity I could to speak about my position, which is what I'm doing to you, right? I'm modeling in front of you today. Last point, and then I'll wind this up. We meet one last time about a year and a half ago. The settlement freeze is about to expire. And I speak with the same people. The same people who were, in a sense, too left to be able to stand up to sing Hatikvah on Yom HaAtzmaut. I said, okay, good. We understand each other. Let's all sign a petition or make a public statement. We're all fairly influential people here, and we have moral influence, to ask Israel to extend the settlement freeze. I happen to think settlements are a bad idea in any event. So, and the same people who really on these issues probably stand to my left or more dovish on many of these questions, say we can't do that either. I said, why? Because if we do that, we'll lose all our funding. There are significant Jewish billionaires who are funding our important activities, and we lose the money. So I said, you're right. I mean, I don't want you to do that. There's not that. If I thought that because we issued this cockamamie statement, that someone's going to notice, and the Israeli government go, oh, we didn't know. Now we'll stop. I would say you should lose your funding. But given that was not likely, it's not something that they should do. So I put all this together. I put the Palo Alto meeting, the Washington meeting at J Street, then that last meeting at Arnie's apartment on the Upper West Side. And I said we're in a new situation in which American Jews, because of the conflict, because of all the issues and so forth and so on, because of moral questions that we all have, we have grown silent on Israel. We don't talk about Israel. And as a lifelong Zionist, as an Israeli, as a Jew, as a sociologist of American Jewry, I find this extremely, extremely depressing. So when Noam asked me, what would you like to speak about on the 5th of ER in Seattle, I said, there's no question. I want to open up. I want to provide material to open up a serious conversation about Israel, because it cannot be the case that Jews are going to be silent about Israel. We have our differences about Israel. We have to talk about Israel. But we cannot allow those differences to inhibit us from having respectful, intense, serious conversations about Israel, because what that will mean is that if we stop talking about Israel and we repress people's expressions about Israel, on the right or the left, we're going to go into an era in the future in which Israel will not be part of the consciousness of American Jews, And I think for that in and of itself would be a tremendous loss, and I don't want it to happen on my watch. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's do this like we did yesterday, okay? If you have questions, please go to one of the microphones on either side and ask your questions. And it sounds like a wonderful, he's asking you to ask questions. Sounds like a wonderful opportunity to get some conversation going here.
Yeah, and I know it may be difficult for you to ask questions because you're supposed to ask questions and you really have something you really deeply want to say. So let me teach you how to do this. You make your passionate statement. Try not to make it too offensive, but if it happens, it happens. And then at the end of the statement, you say, Professor Cohen, would you agree? And that turns the statement into a question, and you've asked the question. So that's something that you could easily do.
I have two short questions. Oh, go ahead. Two short questions.
Oh, there you are.
So birthright. Any comments on the effectiveness of birthright, or for the non-Orthodox who have spent meaningful time in Israel, in terms of your data? And then the second question is the inability to talk about politics in Israel. Is that also a reflection? It seems to me it is, but do you think it's a reflection of also the inability of the center in Israel to talk about politics? Because I think in Israel itself there's a silence about, in the center, it's very difficult to talk about politics there. I've seen that trend over time, and I'm wondering if you think, is that a reflection of what's going on here too?
All right, so on birthright, there are, I'm of two minds. I don't know which one of these is correct. One is that a single trip of 10 days actually produces lasting effects in the overall population. And the other is that a single trip of 10 days produces an effect only for those people who return to Israel. It's really possible that the second is true, and I hope to get access to some data to be able to clarify that. My initial thinking and my thinking that derives from way back in 1991 suggests that the second may be true, but that doesn't invalidate the importance of birthright. I did my original piece of research on the impact of an Israel trip for Charles Bronfman back in 1991, and this is before birthright. And he was a little upset that I was finding that there's no difference between one-time travelers and no-time travelers, but a big difference between two-time travelers and one-time travelers. And he was paying for a first trip, or some, and I said, like, I don't think you should be very upset because I've done some other research for you, which shows that unquestionably, no one has gone on a second trip without going on a first trip. So, you know, so the first trip is valuable. It's just a question of in what way is it valuable. But I'm convinced that if it leads to a second trip, especially a second long trip, there are tremendous effects. So that's that's the answer to the birthright question. On Israel, basically, I agree with you that that at a certain point, both the left and the right stopped talking and stopped yelling at each other, in part because the basic assumptions of the left and the right were challenged by reality. In a sense, the right's dream of greater Israel, if we just had enough Jews, and we just persist, we're going to take all that land that belongs to the Jewish people, Yehudah v'Shomron, Judea and Samaria. It's going to be ours. We just keep at it. The world will accommodate. We can do this. No one in Israel really believes that's true. And the left's dream, the Shimon Peres, the new Middle East, if we do this, they'll do that. They're moderates. We're moderates. There's going to be a settlement, and that was heavily shadowed by the Intifadas and by the Gaza pullout. I do remember Shimon Peres back in the 1990s, screaming at the Knesset, Hem anashim kamonu. Hem anashim kamonu. They are people like us. They are people like us to say, look, we're all people. We got to come to an agreement. These are people just like us. I think, by the way, I think he made a political mistake by doing that. But you would never hear Shimon Peres say that today, not just because of his being president. It's politically impossible in Israel to advance that argument. And it's also politically impossible to advance the argument, there'll be another 10 million Olim and we'll take it all. I was in a conversation with Don Meridor, if you know the name, fine, if not. And at some point, Don Meridor, who's an old Cherutnik, was justice minister, and so forth and so on. At some point, he switched, like around 1990, from being a hawk, a greater Israel advocate, to everyone knows he's really a dove. He really thinks we shouldn't. It's a fruitless enterprise. And I said, Don, what happened to you? Why'd you switch? He said, well, at some point I figured out that after the Russian Aliyah, there wouldn't be enough Olim, enough Jews coming to Israel to take the territories. I said, really? That's it? He said, yeah. I said, I figured that out in 1969. I was a kid, but I was never justice minister of the state of Israel, so what do I know? But I really want to assure you that so both sides can look at the other and go, well, maybe you're right. Maybe you're right all along. So that's part of why the conversation has died down. The other reason is that the hard left in Israel, that's a hard left, the core of the left in Israel, I think really lost touch with the society and failed to learn the lessons of Rabin. Rabin was the last effective left-wing politician in Israel, and he was effective because he did not present the Palestinians as doves and as moderates. He saw them as he projected his own feeling that they are an enemy, they're an antagonist, and we have to do business with them because we're going to be attacked by Iran 20 years from now. This is 1993, 1992. He's already talking about the Iranian threat. He's sending spies into Kurdistan to prepare to defend ourselves against Iran, and decides that he has to come to an agreement. I'm looking at Joel Migdal, and I'm hoping I'm not getting too much of this wrong. Is it about right? Yeah? Don't tell him tell him later. Wait till I leave. You don't embarrass me in front of these people. But as far as I know, so Rabin was an effective left-wing politician, and I think Shimon Peres is more representative, and I think made the mistake of yelling and screaming, "Hey, anashim kamonu." They're people like us, and it was a political mistake, and actually I think it turned out to be a factual mistake. So the other answer to your question about why dialogue has gone silent is that the left lost, the right won. If you look at the political configuration of Israel, you got a million Russians, and you got working class Sephardim, and you got old line revisionists, and you got settlers, and you got religious parties, religious people. And it's like an Everett McKinley Dirksen moment. A billion here, a billion there. A million here, a million there. Pretty soon you have 60% of the Jewish electorate, and so roughly 60% of the Jewish electorate will vote for some right-wing party in Israel, and then the Arabs and the other 40% can squeak by and come close to having a left-of-center coalition. And right now the competition for who's going to lead Israel, if there is one, is between three Likud splinters: the Russian splinter, the Likud splinter, and Shaul Mofaz leading the Kadima splinter. But these are all basically knockoffs of the old Likud. So for the first time, I'm thinking about I'm really going to vote for a Likud party. I'm going to vote for Kadima. It's a strong possibility because I learned when I voted for John Anderson that was a ridiculous mistake. That you have to choose between the leading candidates. So another reason for the decline of the conversation in Israel is that the left lost, and people are just deeply depressed, and and they engage in all kinds of activities that I think are not all that effective. There's one more reason, and I'll stop, and that is in the United States, the moral and political difficulties that Jews have in having this conversation. But I'll pick up on that at some other point with the next comments. I think we'll go left.
Yeah, on the subject of your recent depression regarding this issue of silence, which I share as well, where is sort of the balance of responsibility? In the 80s, 70s, 90s, Israel made significant effort to engage American Jewry. I was very involved with the Shaliach program in New Jersey. They would come here. They were all kinds of Jews from Israel. We had a lot of dialogue locally. It was really exciting. Gone. Saknut, no money, we're not doing it. So I understand you're being upset with the silence, but to what degree can we as American Jews expect that anybody over there really cares or wants to hear from us? Because my impression is in the last 20 years, they really don't, and it's sort of over, and maybe that's the natural situation with the diaspora that, okay, they're there, we're here, we talk, they listened, they went away, and that's it. So why is that inherently depressing? That's the question to you.
I don't think there's been a major shift, and if anything, it's been in a positive direction in terms of Israelis' interest in hearing what American Jews have to say. It was never. I don't think way back when. I don't think there was a lot of openness on the part of Israelis in the 60s and 70s. Remember the Golda Meir era and Rabin when he was prime minister. But they were representing, real kind of hardcore Israeli national ethos. They weren't sitting up all night wondering what's the latest advice we can get, out of New York or wherever. And I think, if anything, because of the increased communication and the Aliyah and certain very, very interesting changes in Israeli society, I think there's actually more communication today and openness than there was then, and there's less also national bravado now than there was then. And actually, there may be more openness today than there was at that time. Certainly, we have lots of American Jews supporting settlement activities and yeshivas and all kinds of other things, and Israelis are very happy to get that support. And also, my own experience has been there's been a lot of dialogue back and forth. So I don't attribute what I've called the silence of the Jews here about Israel to Israeli activity or shutting down debate. I mean, you could make a case. I don't think it's very strong. I think American Jews have redefined what it means to be Jewish in a way that diminishes politics, and I think American Jews are of a liberal bent, have a hard time fighting two battles at once, which is there really are people who are Israel detractors who'd like to hurt Israel, and there really are Israelis who have a different point of view, who are in the majority in the electorate and the government, who'd like to take Israel in a direction which we think is hurtful to Israel. So how do you say something that doesn't help those anti-Israel, anti-Zionist folks over here, and also is effective in countering the pro-settlement expansionist policies over there? It's a very, very difficult situation, especially when there's a lot of support and I think at times repression coming out of the hardline pro-Israel camp here. So that's really that's really what the issue is. I mean, all those issues. I think things internal to American Jewry, and not to the credit or blame of Israel.
Okay.
But
thank you.
Worth a. Is there someone over there? Sorry.
Yeah. I want to ask for your insight on a couple of things that I've seen here in Seattle recently. Last year, the Israel Philharmonic came and played here. And before they played, there were protesters outside playing music. And during the concert or during intermission, there were police in the auditorium, and some people were ejected, and a sign was unfurled, and people had to be put down, and they were ejected afterwards. And as I was walking home, there was a a police cordon around the hotel where the Philharmonic folks were staying, where their bus was. And as a musician myself, I thought, gee, you know, these folks are just playing music. That's what they're doing. They played Hatikva, they played the Star Spangled Banner, people stood. Okay. So this past Saturday night, it was a concert, same concert hall, and a Macedonian pianist was playing. And he played wonderfully well, and some signs were unfurled with flags of Macedonia, and there were people there from Macedonia sitting in my row, congratulating each other and really spirited, happy for this kind of occasion, but without the stuff that I see at an Israel event. Or if I walk on campus here after something like Yom HaAtzmaut or some Israel event, I'll see things scrawled on campus in chalk, typically, that aren't particularly pleasant to read as a Jew. So what am I supposed to do with all of that? Why are we so different than these Macedonians? What's going on here? Why do we feel so free to make it difficult for folks who aren't, they're not political? But why does this kind of thing happen? And why does it happen here? What do you think?
Well, there are macro reasons and micro reasons. On the macro level, Israel has a lot more journalists sitting there than Macedonia. Israel is one of the most interesting pieces of geography in the entire world. Three religions regard Israel more or less as its sacred home. As a result, there really are more journalists situated in Israel and Palestine on a kind of a square meter basis than probably any other country, reflecting the interest of the entire world in Israel. That's number one. Number two, Jews in the United States are extraordinarily overrepresented in political and cultural elites. And I go through all the numbers with you, but the only elite where Jews are not highly represented is in the military. But on many other elites, 30, 40, 50% of the elite figures, be they doctors or lawyers or journalists or financiers or aides to Obama, I mean, Supreme Court justices, there's an incredibly high representation of Jews in the political and cultural elites of the United States. Third, Jews have a history of contestation. There's a reason that Talmud is our founding document. Whether we read it or not, it still reflects a culture of conversational contestation. And last but not least, Israel is the only Western country that's engaged in occupation of another people that doesn't want to be occupied by it. It's not the Basque. It's not the Flemings and the Walloons. It's not the Francophones and the Anglophones. This is not a conflict that looks like any other conflict that we have of any other Western country. So that people see that. There's nothing like it in the world, at least in the Western world. So you put all that together, it makes perfect sense that the Israel Philharmonic Orchestra will be subjected to a different political environment than the Macedonian choir or even the Uzbeki choir, notwithstanding Sacha Baron Cohen. So it's a much more it's programmed for that type of contestation. I totally understand it. I predict it, and as one of my friends says, it's not just predictable. It's predicted that this will be a flashpoint for various political and social forces. Did that answer your question? I can't see your face.
Yeah, that says all of the things I would have known. What I'm looking for is a little bit of insight as to why we feel, as a community, however that community is defined, these very different people in the community, as you've shown us, why it is that we feel that we can do these kinds of things in a concert hall when other folks don't feel that it's appropriate to do that. Why are we so nuts?
Oh, no, we really do have a culture, shall we say, a fairly expressive culture. So, And it actually I was once on a research team with about 6 Jewish scholars and Nancy Ammerman. She's not Jewish. She has a Jewish name. It's not Jewish. She's a Christian scholar of religion. And at the end of the 2 years, this was at JTS, one of us turned to Nancy and said, "Okay, Nancy, we've been together for a while. How are we different?" And she said, "Well, I hope you don't take offense." No, please. It's the only group of scholars I've ever been a part of where everybody talks simultaneously and you actually understand each other. And it's true in Israel. If you turn on Israeli TV and you look at ProPolitica or any of these political conversation shows, everyone's talking simultaneously. The only one who didn't and wasn't was Yossi Beilin. And yes, he dropped out of politics. But everybody else just talked simultaneously, and it was okay. So we are a very verbal people. We're the only people who can invent a language full of curses, not one of which is dirty. Yiddish is full of all these things that you can curse people out, but they're all like PG rated. There's no real X rated. In America, you have X rated words, and they don't mean anything. So in Yiddish, it's the other way around. So we're just very good at being verbally abusive. It's one of our strengths, and it's a cultural norm. So, yes.
So first, to the previous questioner, try being Irish 30 years ago or 50 years ago in America, and you'd see some parallels. But to you, the last line of your talk was you felt that it would be very unfortunate if the American conversation about Israel dropped off. Perhaps as a member of one of those who's watching the conversation drop off and maybe is okay with it, why would that be unfortunate?
Two reasons. Come right to mind. First of all, I'm a Zionist. That means I believe there is such a thing called the Jewish people. There's a Jewish nation. I mean the people are the nation, and it expresses its sovereignty in the Jewish homeland of Israel, and as an axiomatic principle, kind of comparable to a piece of religious faith. I think Jews should care about Israel and talk about Israel. It would be like asking a rabbi, well, what's this thing about God? Like, why do you want people to think about God or to do mitzvahs? The rabbi will, well, that's Jewish. So I'm coming from that point of view. The other reason is that I happen to think that Israel's security policies are bad for the state of Israel. And I think they'll lead to an insecure Israel in the future. And I'm hoping that Israel will change its policies. And I believe that the American Jews who are silent about Israel, when they feel empowered to act and don't feel repressed and feel it's their right to say something, I think I'll get more of them on my side. And I want to win because I care about Israel. So if American Jews weigh in, I think they'll weigh in, the ones who aren't speaking now, they'll weigh in more on the side of the 40% of Israelis who have been losing, and maybe strengthen us, and maybe help move the Israeli political decision-making process in a left direction, and we'll stop settling the territories and mixing in with the Palestinians and giving us problems for generations. So that's why. It's not a bad reason. Yes?
So I come from a background of young Judea as well, and it's a small movement here. It's barely visible to my knowledge, and I was part of the group that tried to get young people interested in it. It seemed to me that the young people affiliated with religious youth groups, their parents sent them to synagogue youth groups and camps, and the connection to Israel was, this is our heritage, but not so much the involvement in the Zionism and the discussion of politics, because you wouldn't want to criticize.
Right.
And so it seems like the disconnect from the youth is because they got the Jewish food and the Jewish occasions, but didn't have any depth to their involvement beyond the Jewish practices?
Well, I think you're pointing to something I mentioned briefly before, in that being Jewish has been redefined to emphasize those parts of being Jewish which are most closely labeled religious. But let's not quibble about terms. The Judaism, or the Jewishness that I admire and participate in personally, goes beyond that to include political and cultural involvement. So I'm agreeing with you. There are larger trends in society and in Judaism which have made that transition take place, and started pretty much in the 1980s, give or take. And that's another reason to re-engage Jews with Israel. Because if they become more Israel involved, they'll see that being Jewish is not just about mitzvah and halacha and Talmud and emunah and all kinds of other wonderful things that people can do or should do. But it also involves another big piece of Jewish civilization that I think we're losing. The other thing I would say to you, the other direction is which I haven't touched on, and that is to seeing and this gets into a difficult conversation, and seeing building of a moral, ethical, attractive, democratic society in Israel as something that we're all interested in and committed to. So that when Israel falls short on those terms, as America does, by the way, we feel empowered, obligated, interested in order to engage in those efforts. So that's another area where there could be a crossover between current young people's interests, which is in making the world a better place, and Israel per se. But we don't have answers. I'm agreeing with you that this is we're pointing at an endemic, systemic, and deep, I think, shortcoming in American Judaism, which has occurred in my lifetime.
You mentioned the involvement of the young people in America towards Israel. What I was wondering also is, how involved are the Israeli young people politically and actively in trying to perhaps make a more cohesive government and work towards peaceful resolution?
And I do have some kind of first-hand knowledge of this. I have a 27-year-old daughter who lives in Yerushalayim, who's been politically active for many, many years already. So there are lots of young people's movements, not just political, but cultural, religious, and there's still a very admirable and attractive civic involvement on the part of Jewish young people, despite the materialism of society and the high tech and then all the problems and difficulties. I am impressed with the sense of civic obligation that I see among young people on the right and the left, by the way. I mean, the hilltop youth, the kids who go and do these things, they build these illegal settlements, they're acting out of that same public-spirited impulse that my daughter is and was in being involved in a Jerusalem Rape Crisis Center, which is what she was doing, and other things. So there's a lot. I think there's a lot of that going on. I'm really quite impressed with Israeli society.
Steve, would it feel right if we allow a few more questions, just the people who are there now, waiting, and then?
No, I think we have less time than that. I think I'm looking at the clock.
Okay, I'll leave it up to you, but no more than that. And then
so
I'll leave
some
that
quick
up to you.
comments, and I'll try to wind up. We're going back and forth. Yeah.
So my question is about the disturbance you were talking about. And so Judaism has always been kind of like fluid, and it existed. I mean, the state of Israel is fairly young compared to the American Jewish tradition. But now there's this authority in Israel that's telling you sort of the official rules of how to get married and who's a Jew and how to convert. And I was just wondering if this is causing maybe a disturbance in how Jews perceive Israel, or
Yeah.
I mean, because I think that in Israel it's causing disturbance. So.
Well, yeah. Especially non-Orthodox rabbis, when you ask them, as I do, what bothers you about Israel? The lack of status for the non-Orthodox rabbis is really very off-putting to them, and people who have strong identities as non-Orthodox Jews feel that Israel is insulting their way of being Jewish. And that's fairly common. You should just know that Israelis are taking the matters into their own hands. My daughter, for one, 27 years old, and she, when she gets married, may it come quickly in our time. She's told me that she won't get married with a rabbinate. She's like, she won't get married. She won't get married in Israel. She's a lawyer. She understands the law. Israel has a very strong civil union, known yadua b'tzibur. You're known in the public as a couple, and there are a huge number of rights that are given to both partners in that relationship. And she claims that she and 95% of her friends will not get married in Israel. They're going to walk around the rabbinate. So and she's not alone. There's like I think 21% of marriages recently were not conducted by the rabbinate, and it's growing. So there's a kind of civil disobedience that's going on in Israel today. So I'm trying to say there's certainly hope in that regard, and part of what we need to do is to get the message out that there's a political arrangement in Israel. It's unfortunate, but don't blame all of Israel for this for these leftover arrangements that go back to the founding of the state. Comment.
You might want to tackle this one. I was imagining from the last talk that you gave that I was what you call a borderline Jew, and I heard you
Borderland. The borderline has a different.
Borderline, right? Borderlands.
Yeah.
Borderline too. But
you may have borderline personality, but go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, borderland Jew listens to you talk, and is actually a little curious about what you're talking about. It's all, new stuff to him. But he says to you, "Look, I really don't get it. I mean, what does it all matter to you for? What is it so important? Why are you so interested in this subject?" I was really thinking about what you might say to a comment like that.
This is why God brought me and my forefathers out of the land of Egypt. What do you say to Rasha? Who wants to separate him or herself from the people? So I would say that, frankly, everybody has a right to make their own choice as to how they want to relate to this identity. I'm assuming that I'm in an audience of people who actually care about these matters, and I'm making that as an assumption of the conversation. If someone actually came seriously and said, I don't get it, why do you care? Let's talk. I would say, look, I happen to have an extraordinarily rich life because of this commitment. I believe in it, but I really have a whole symbol system. I have friends. I walk through life and I actually see meaning where I think others don't. They have other meaning systems, but this is a really, really, really good one. So I can make that argument, and he or she could say, well, why Judaism? I'll say, well, are you Jewish? Because if you're not Jewish, then you're right. But if you are Jewish, then there's a certain primordial attachment that I'm willing to play off of. So in a serious conversation, I think I would have an answer. But you know what? I don't do that. Like there are rabbis who do that much better than I do. I'm married to one, and so I just deal with the Jewish people. I don't deal with Jewish people. Quick comments.
During your talk,
Yeah.
During your talk, you mentioned that you were a right-wing dove, and I wondered if you could elaborate on that. And also, in the response to an earlier question, you said that you hoped that you wanted the dialogue amongst American Jews about Israel to continue and not peter out because you wanted the shift, you wanted there to be a kind of leftward pull on the part of American Jews, an influence on Israeli politics. And regarding that, I'm wondering, couldn't one make the case that really what goes on, the policies Israel adopts, shouldn't that just be, the responsibility is really for Israelis to decide that? And if
Right.
if it's not, if it is for Americans to help direct that. What form would that take? Would you support Peter Beinart's argument that one should, what he calls, boycott the non-democratic Israel, as he calls it, meaning the settlements? Or if not that, then what exactly would you envision as the influence?
There are other New York Times op-ed pieces you can read, like yesterday's or today's, in which prominent Israelis say, which is a position that I have, we should take unilateral steps to separation. That's my position. So what makes me a right-wing dove or a hawk dove is that I am willing to accept, I conceive of the Palestinians as a serious national movement that if I were, if I were a Palestinian, would want the entire land of Israel, and they have it's difficult for them to come to a peace agreement with Israel, even when we make moves or offers in their direction. So that makes me a hawk. So I accept the right-wing analysis of the Palestinians and of the environment as being a very dangerous environment. When there are 200,000 missiles pointed at you, you have a certain strong security consciousness, which I believe I credit the right with having that consciousness generally more than the left. No, not entirely. So what makes me a dove? I want to get off the territories. I really think it's dangerous for Jews to be, Jewish civilians to be in those territories, having 4-year-olds and women and old people sitting amidst all those Arabs and having our other children being required to defend them and having us being required to search Palestinian women on the way to hospitals and preventing them from going about their business. I think it's a bad policy. And when I was working as a Zionist propagandist at Columbia University, Israel was telling me, whatever settlements we build is only for security. We don't want this territory. We're just trying to, create a border with Jordan and extend Jerusalem, and that's it. And I believe them, and I could support that. But that's not what we did. What we did is we sent hundreds of thousands of Jews into those territories, mixing the map up such that it's really very difficult to create a Palestinian state over there and a Jewish state over here. I believe that we're strong enough to defend ourselves against a separate Palestinian state, if and when, and I think when it attacks us, and we can retaliate and we can repress that attack as we did in Gaza. So that I am no pushover. I'm not a pacifist. But I really believe that the current course is dangerous. What's going to happen is that the Palestinians will rise up one way or the other against us. Either there'll be massive civil disobedience, or there'll be another intifada. They'll be supported by Arab governments all over the Middle East. They may be supported by the Iranians, and we don't know exactly what they have. We'll be condemned by the Europeans. We'll be boycotted by the Europeans. We're going to split American Jewry, and we're going to have an American foreign policy which will not be supportive of Israel, and we'll have to get off the territories without security guarantees. That's what I'm afraid of. And it's going to happen in 2016 or 2020, 2025. We cannot go on as occupying those lands and expect that we're going to get away scot-free. So it's a security analysis that leads me to this situation, and I want to leave sooner rather than later because I think we'll get a better deal in 2013 and 2014 than we will in 2024. That's my position. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much for two very stimulating Stroum lectures.